Welcome to NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. I'm Veronica McGregor. We are holding our final news conference for this week, a week that has seen us have a tremendous success in landing on Mars and the beginning of the exploration of a new world. We're going to hear in a little while from Ben Sicci, Senior Software Engineer here at JPL, who's going to give us a preview of what's coming up in the next few days for the rover. But first, we're going to hear from the Entry, Descent, and Landing team. They have been poring over the data since Sunday night, and they have some new details to give us. And to begin with, I want to start by introducing the Entry, Descent, and Landing phase lead, Adam Steltzner, and his deputy, Miguel San Martin.
Thank you, Veronica. We have a talented panel here for you today, and Miguel and I really wanted to be the ones to introduce them to you. Leading off the rotation from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the operations lead for Entry, Descent, and Landing, Alan Chen. To his left, from the Johnson Space Flight Center, in charge of guidance, that guided entry that got us to the spot on Mars, Gavin Mendek. To his left, again from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the segment owner for parachute descent, Devin Kipp, followed by, also from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, in charge of powered flight, sort of an important thing, Steve Sell. Beside him, looking much better than Steve, from the Langley Research Center, trajectory specialist, Jody Davis. And last but not least, the senior software engineer and flight software cog-e and my personal idol, Ben Sicci. Now this team here up on the stage represents the tip of the iceberg of a very, very talented set of folks that worked together to make this day possible and to have a rover on the surface. And some of the rest of the team are sitting here representing some of the rest of that iceberg in some small measure, because it's a big iceberg. And I would personally like to take this moment to give them a little round of applause. And so now on to the briefing. Gentlemen?
Obviously, we had a great day on Mars on Sunday. I just want to set up the things you're going to hear from the rest of our team and what we know about EDL. I'll start with how we got there and what the conditions were like when we got to Mars and where exactly we were and what the atmosphere was like. We obviously had an incredibly clean ride from the cruise team. We traveled over 350 million miles on the way to Mars, and we missed our entry target by only about 1 mile. So a pretty impressive ride by the cruise team, and our thanks to them. Over a week out, we made a prediction of where Curiosity would be at the entry point and gave that to Curiosity. We were about 1.25 million miles from Mars at the time. We turned out to be off by only 800 feet. So Curiosity had a very good idea where she was at the top of the atmosphere, and that's something that Gavin over here with our entry guidance took advantage of. If you bring up my first figure, the atmosphere figure, if you would, you'll see that the atmosphere was very much as we expected. Could we switch figures to the atmosphere figure? Thank you. I don't think we've had a weather report since the day before we landed, but this is the weather as we knew it on the day we did land on August 5th. It looks very similar to the days you saw before. We have clear skies, some water-ice clouds, nice clear and cold day, just like we liked it, and just like we thought we would see. So there's very few dust events. They are beginning to pick up in the season, but still far away from the crater. We got there before any dust could get there, so that contributed to us having a very good day. In general, EDL performance was as expected, with very few exceptions. People will walk through that in some detail here. But we only know that because our EDL communications was so good on the night of landing. Everything that you're going to hear today is primarily based on data that we received that night from all our different sources. So we had EDL communications from all three orbiters that were listening, from Mars Odyssey, from Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, and from Mars Express. We also had information sent direct to Earth via the tones that were heard both at Canberra and at ESA's New Norcia station, so both NASA and ESA were listening. We even listened to some of the information that was being sent to the relay orbiters from Earth, from Radio Observatory here on Earth. So we got all the data we expected to see. There's one more source, of course, that will help us do a really detailed EDL reconstruction, and that's the recorded data that's on Curiosity still right now, waiting to be sent back. That should be in total about 100 megabytes worth of data that'll help us learn everything. That's on the order of 60 iPhone pictures, but that'll help us figure out what was going on in detail. Right now, all we're really working from is what we got back that night, which is about 1 megabyte, or less than most iPhone pictures. But that still lets us know a lot about what was going on. Direct to Earth, we received 67 heartbeat tones and 26 informational tones. The fact that there were so many heartbeat tones tells us everything was going well. The spacecraft didn't really have any errors to report, and things were going very nominally. The last tone we received was heat shield separation. This was completely as expected. We lost signal almost exactly 5 minutes after entry, which was within seconds of our prediction. So things went pretty much as expected for direct to Earth tones. From MRO, we actually got more data than we expected. We had coverage for about 19 minutes. We actually locked up about 8 minutes before entry, about 5 minutes early compared to our predictions, and had coverage through landing plus 6 minutes. As we were concerned about, we had a plasma blackout for about 43 seconds, but the flight software, the way we designed the EDL communications, we were prepared for a blackout of 75 seconds. So that actually worked out as well too, and we have data interleaved in there to tell us what was going on during the blackout. We send some data after the blackout to tell us what was going on during the blackout. Odyssey had coverage for about 12 minutes, started about 2 minutes and 19 seconds after entry. That was about 20 seconds later than we expected, but still well within our predictions. The total data from Mars Odyssey and MRO was about 1 megabyte of unique data. So right now we're just working with the subset of the data that's been relayed. Soon we'll have, in a couple weeks, we'll have all the data coming back from the rover to tell us exactly what went on, and we'll be able to reconstruct our full trajectory and learn anything we can about this EDL system that we might want to push forward. We have some data here that shows the actual event timing. There was some confusion, but I think we've got that all sorted out now on when the actual events occurred. So if you look at the figure that we're showing here, we have both the actual time that occurred on Mars and the time that we heard about it here on Earth for some major events here that folks will talk about. So as we step through entry, descent, landing, that's kind of how this panel is laid out to the side here. We'll first start with Gavin talking about the entry guidance and how well we did there.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. So the entry phase, we enter the atmosphere at about 24 times the speed of sound, Mach 24. And we plunged deep in the atmosphere, and then using the techniques that Curiosity had compared to previous recent landers, flew parallel to the ground. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about that. And we flew entry all the way down to just under Mach 2. Lasted about 3.5 minutes, very close to the expected time, the duration we were thinking we'd see. We pulled a little bit over 11 Earth Gs, so if you were a human riding on board, it'd be a little bit of a rough ride. But fortunately, Curiosity's made of some pretty sturdy stuff, and she handled that just fine. So I want to provide some context for how this mission did compared to previous missions. So if we could go to the landing ellipse graphic. What we're looking at here is a topography map of Gale Crater. You can see Mount Sharp right there in the middle of the crater. You can see our Curiosity ellipse, the smallest ellipse right there, on just north of the slopes of Mount Sharp. But let's back up a little bit. I mean, in the 1970s, we had the 2 Viking landers. They landed in different parts of Mars, not here. But we got their landing ellipse, the uncertainty of where they would land, sort of provided here for scale. And you can see it's a very large area. I mean, part of that was due to the atmosphere uncertainties. This is the first time we landed on Mars. We knew very little about what the atmosphere would really do. And the landers did quite well. They both landed successfully. Then it was, unfortunately, several decades before we returned to Mars with a lander, and then Pathfinder, the rover that could, landed with a smaller ellipse, but it didn't use a lift and entry. It came in more like a cannonball, a spinning cannonball. But over the years, with Spirit and Opportunity and Phoenix, we're able to reduce those landing areas even better. And a lot of that's due to the hard work of our interplanetary navigation team to further pinpoint the entry point in the atmosphere. So what was then dominating a lot of the dispersion was what the atmosphere did and how the vehicle actually flew. And so what Curiosity did here is we basically built on top of all those improvements to make that even better. So the way we fly our entry, I think Adam's mentioned over the last few days the tungsten ballast, basically 6 segments right here. And what they do is they basically trim the vehicle. So when we're hypersonic speed, we have a little bit of lift. Basically, we glide slightly in the direction that we're leaning. And very slowly, but when you're going Mach 20, that's more than enough speed for what we need. So what we did, and I guess before I get into that, let me just explain. We marked the star right there on our landing ellipse. It's a little bit close to the center. It's about 1.5 miles downrange. And I want to explain what we know today, why we weren't right in the middle like we wanted to be, but hey, we're still happy where we landed. The 1.5 miles comes to the way we flew. So when we enter the atmosphere, we've got this trim angle of attack, as I mentioned. So imagine my hand is the heat shield right here. And so we're flying in this direction. So as we're leaning, we'll basically turn the direction that we're leaning very slowly. And what we're doing during that period is we're looking how far are we to the target. Are we going to fly past it? Are we going to fly short of it? We respond to that. If we think we're going to fly past it, I need to get a little bit deeper in the atmosphere so I don't fly past it. So a little bit more lift down. But while I'm doing that, I'm also turning a little bit to the side. But I still want to go back to the target. And so we have what we call these bank reversals, which basically rotate us over. And during Curiosity's entry, we had 3 bank reversals, the number that we expected. But what was interesting about Curiosity is that third bank reversal was right at the end of range control, where we're controlling our distance flown. So we had our third reversal, and then we had it for a few seconds, but during that period of time, we climbed a little bit in the atmosphere. And we didn't have a lot of time after the reversal before we said, we're done with range control now. We're going to start aiming towards the target. And so at the end of range control, we already had close to 1 mile of air already, which is well within the dispersions. But that's basically some of the setup that we're seeing to explain part of our miss distance, why it was closer to 1.5 miles. There's some other things that could have contributed to that. We're sensitive to tailwinds, as we've seen in our computer simulations, and over the next several weeks and months, we'll be looking at that to see how much the tailwinds did as well. But so when we got down to I would be remiss if I didn't mention where entry guidance came from. As Adam mentioned, I'm from Johnson Space Center. We've done guided entry there since the 60s, Gemini, Apollo shuttle. It's very important coming back from the moon that you land the crew and the payload down and get to them as quickly as you can. And so when MSL started, over 10 years ago, we were trying to improve the landing ellipse, and guided entry seemed like the right thing to do, and I'm glad to say it worked really well. The predictions errors we're seeing during guidance, they looked very close to what we were expecting. I've been trying to find something interesting to talk about besides our slight miss distance, and unfortunately we haven't found anything yet. So, but that really goes, I think, a lot of credit to the aerodynamics team at Langley, the atmosphere teams here at some of these universities, and JPL. They did a great job helping us characterize how we're going to fly, and it looked like we did well. So at the end of the entry guidance phase, we're approaching the target ellipse. We then do a rotation because we want to get rid of this entry ballast right before parachute deploy. And with that, I'll hand it over to Devin Kipp to talk about that.
Thanks, Kevin. So what I'm going to share with everybody today is a brief sampling of what we already know about the parachute descent segment and how well this piece of hardware performed on the way down. We only have some cursory ideas of how well it performed until we get a detailed trajectory reconstruction and atmospheric construction. We can only infer things. But this is an incredibly important piece of data to get because we don't have a lot of experience flying parachutes in the Martian atmosphere. We've done it 6 times before, now 7, and we've only done it at Earth a few times as well. So when you've only done something 10 times or so, the 11th time is a lot of extra data, and it's really exciting to see that just as a flight test of a parachute. So let's bring up the first image. Everybody's seen this. As of about 3 a.m. Monday morning, this was the most beautiful picture I'd ever seen in my life.
It's a nice one.
And you can tell a whole lot about how the parachute performed just by looking at this parachute. You can see that it's got its inflated shape perfectly. You can see the dark area at the top of the parachute, which is the vent that lets some air escape through the top of the parachute. The shape here is exactly what we expected to see. And you don't see any apparent damage. There's no holes visible, there's no tearing visible. And this picture was taken well into the parachute descent segment, probably 40 to 50 seconds after parachute deployment. And we see a perfectly functioning parachute that looks exactly like we thought. So that's great news. More than that, we can get some information by looking at the event times. When did things happen compared to when we expected things to happen? The parachute deployed about 259 seconds after entry, compared to our predict of between 241 and 263 seconds. So we're right in that sweet spot where we thought we would be, perhaps a little bit later than the center, which is consistent with having maybe a little less drag than we expected during the entry phase. But from this, we can conclude that the parachute opened in the conditions we thought it would open and that we had tested it to open in. So the right Mach number regime, the right dynamic pressure regime, and therefore the right loading on the parachute during the inflation event. The second event time we can look at is when did the heat shield deploy? The heat shield deploys based on a sensed velocity. So after you open this parachute, you very quickly decelerate from Mach 1.7 or so subsonically down to about Mach 0.7. And that took 20 seconds for the parachute to slow you down that much, compared to our predict of between 16 and 26 seconds. So again, right in the sweet spot of what we predicted. And that tells us that the supersonic drag of this parachute was, again, very nominal, what we expected to see. It performed beautifully. And then the third time point you can look at is when backshell separation happened. And that was about 95 seconds after heat shield separation, again, right in line with what we expected. Here we had a very large dispersion on what we expected, anywhere from 60 to 150 seconds that we could have been descending slowly on that parachute. That's mostly due to not knowing what altitude precisely the parachute was going to deploy at, and also not knowing so well the subsonic drag that the parachute was going to provide. So the fact that we're right in the middle of that time window suggests not only that the parachute behaved perfectly, but also that the parachute deploy altitude was fairly nominal and almost precisely what we expected. Again, all of these are implications. We don't know these things for sure, but based on the limited data we have, this is what we can infer. The second thing I want to discuss with you is what we call wrist mode. It's the behavior of the capsule underneath the parachute. As the capsule is suspended down below the parachute, it's not going to be perfectly still, it's going to wobble some, and that's what we call the wrist mode. As the capsule oscillates under the parachute, there's some dynamics going on that we want to keep very slight. You don't want the capsule going all over the place for a variety of reasons. One is that the separation events are designed to have fairly benign motions. When you separate that heat shield, for it to separate cleanly and not recontact, you don't want the capsule dancing all over the place. Same thing at backshell separation. The other thing, though, is we have these radar beams that are trying to measure their altitude and velocity of the spacecraft relative to the ground. And if the capsule's dancing all over the place, those radar beams might be looking far, far away from the landing location and measuring the altitude of some terrain feature that's far away that we don't really care about. So if you can bring up the movie, this is the thumbnail version of the Marty movie. And you see the camera dancing around a little bit. And this is good evidence of some wrist mode happening as the camera field of view is changing. What we know, both from the real-time data products from our inertial measurement unit and from this image, is that the wrist mode we saw was very benign and consistent with what we would have expected. Wrist mode is something that caused some concern for us on MSL because during the Mars Exploration Rover entries, we got surprised a little bit, and we saw some wrist mode behavior for MER that was a little bit higher than we expected, and we couldn't really explain at the time the physics that went into that. So one of the major focuses for the Mars Science Laboratory was to figure out how to model this better, how to better understand the physics of wrist mode. And the fact that the observed wrist mode aligns very well with our predicts gives us some confidence that we may have conquered that problem. One interesting thing you'll see in this video is the ground is spinning, and that's consistent with the capsule rotating underneath the parachute at between 1 and 2 degrees per second. During the 90 seconds we're descending here, we almost do a complete revolution underneath the parachute. And again, that's consistent with our predicts. We thought maybe up to 3 degrees per second of rotation, and we're down at 1 degree per second. Not a lot of exciting things happened because everything was right down the pipe of what we expected, but that's how we won it. One other thing I want to point out, if you can bring up the third image, and this is just sort of nice because it's verification of an EDL requirement. We have countless EDL requirements that we have to verify. And this image, fortuitously, is almost exactly 3 seconds after heat shield separation. And the heat shield is about 15 meters away from the back shell. And this is an important number because until the heat shield is 15 meters away, we're a little bit nervous about the radar because it's possible that more than one radar beam can actually see the heat shield during those first 15 meters of motion. And if they do, they'll get a measurement of a very close altitude that will be rejected. It won't cause any hazards, but we want to get the heat shield more than 15 meters away as quick as we can. And our requirement was 15 meters in 5 seconds. And this picture tells us we got 15 meters in 3 seconds. So that's one verification that we can check. We met that requirement. So with that, I'll let Steve talk about powered descent.
Thanks, Devin. So just really quickly, I want to go through what happens during powered descent. And we start off by, we're on the back shell. The rover and the descent stage are inside the back shell. We get about 1.6 kilometers or 1 mile altitude. We drop and free fall out of the back shell for 1 second, and then we light the engines and divert to the side so we don't run into the parachute that's still coming down behind us. Vertical flight all the way to the ground. So I want to bring up basically the rest of the video that Devin first started, if we can go ahead and start that. This is 3.88 frames a second. You can see we're starting out here with some wrist mode dynamics that Devin talked about, back and forth, and then you'll see it get really still right here. The descent engines have started here, and we are now under powered flight. The first thing that happens is we divert to the side so you can see the ground moving. That's the camera being swung about 20 degrees off vertical as we're moving to the side to avoid the back shell. Then the camera starts to straighten up again, and it will basically snap to straight vertical. We go through the rest of powered descent. You'll start to see the plumes impacting the ground. And in a second, you'll see the wheel drop into place as we start sky crane and lower the mobility. And then, of course, the camera goes pretty dark as we get right down into the dirt. And so, as Devin pointed out, from all of the data we've received so far, we flew this right down the middle. It's absolutely incredible to have worked on a plan for so many years and then just see everything happen exactly according to plan. And as we were watching this in the war room on landing night, it was like all these contingency plans that we had made leading up to EDL about what to do if we lose comm here or lose comm there, or if we don't know where the rover is when it lands down. All of those were just shedding off. It was like weights being lifted off our shoulders as we were able to watch all of the data come in, and everything was going right according to plan. So as you can see, when we hit the ground there, the next thing that happens is the flyaway maneuver, and we were actually extremely lucky, but it was sort of a planned event. If you go to the next image, we were lucky enough to take a rear. Oh, can you go one more? I'm sorry, I might have. Yeah, there. If you look in the left image, we believe we've caught what is the descent stage impact on the Martian surface. Now, this photo was taken about 40 seconds after touchdown. The predicted time of flight of the descent stage is about 20 seconds. So the descent stage would have already impacted by the time this picture was taken. But the evidence that we have that this is something that we've caused is the fact that the same image from the same camera taken 45 minutes later, that artifact is not there anymore. And we do know that the artifact is real because it appears in multiple HazCam pictures from the rear of the rover. So that's about 600 meters away from the rear of the rover, and that is the direction that the descent stage should have flown away. And so we're fairly certain that that is the impact plume. So basically, when the descent stage hits the ground, it's going about 100 miles an hour, and we expected it to kick up quite a lot of dust. We actually selected the rear HazCam to be the first image taken. Actually, the timing of the HazCam pictures, both front and rear, were timed so that we would possibly catch any kind of cloud like this. And the fact that the descent stage flew directly after the rover was an amazing coincidence that we were able to catch this impact. And so you also saw in the video that we were, as we were touching down, we started kicking up dust. And if we can go to the image before, I want to show you something that I personally find just so incredibly moving, is that we were looking off the left side of the rover. If I have the model here, you can see basically the camera. It's a shot from the nav cams up on top of the mast here. It's looking that way down to off the left side of the rover. And you can see two divots in the ground over there, and we blasted those with our rocket engines, so that makes me extremely happy. Now, of course, as you might expect, landing on Mars is a very, very dirty event. I mean, we're basically off-roading for the next 2 years, so we expected some debris and dirt and dust to get on things. Of course, if you take your SUV out and you actually use it off-road, you expect it to get a little bit dirty. And so we, of course, wanted to start off day one with a little bit of dirt on the side. So, you never like having those brand new sneakers that are nice and shiny. So you can see on the top deck of the rover there is a little bit of debris that we kicked up with the rocket engines as expected. And so, again, this is more evidence of, we did that with rockets, so that's pretty cool. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jody, who will walk us through our predicted versus actual trajectory performance.
Thanks, Steve. So I'll be talking about two things. First, we'll go through a Google Mars animation, which is, we use Google Mars, and it actually has our latest predicted trajectory. This was prior to landing. And then we'll go through after landing and how we used our simulations and what we got from Curiosity at touchdown to determine where we thought we landed and how that actually compared to where we really landed. So if I could have the video. This is Google Mars, and it's going to take us through, now remember this is real simulation data here. We're going through the bank reversals, the first bank reversal, second and third, and this is only half of the angle of the bank reversal. This is going 4 times real time. And we actually use Google Mars to analyze the trajectory, to see it in 3D space instead of just numbers on white paper or MATLAB files. And so this is taking us through the entry balance mass jettison, and what we'll do is we'll pitch over and we'll look at the landing site, and we'll actually see a couple pans of the landing site. Now this trajectory is what we assumed is the nominal trajectory that was based off of the latest and greatest navigation that we got right prior to landing. So this just takes a glimpse over Gale Crater, parachute deploy. This is the configuration that we were at, and parachute deploy happened about 10:15, just 5 seconds after 10:15 Mars time, Pacific. So here we have heat shield separation. Heat shield separation happened 20 seconds after. Now, 18 seconds after that, we had radar lockup. And that actually, radar lockup happened about 1.5 kilometers higher than what we expected. And that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. And 77 seconds after that, we had backshell separation. Time happened as expected. Things are looking nominal. And here we kind of pan down to the rover. Touchdown happened 55 seconds after backshell set, all as we expected. I wanted to point out here that the flag, the American flag that's sitting under the rover, give a shout out to Google Mars. They actually put our landing location in Google Mars already, so that was kind of neat. So those are the types of things that we were looking at right before entry to see how things were looking and how they were going to compare after entry, after touchdown. So if we could move to the next figure. So now this is after landing. We want to know, where is this rover? Or where's an estimate of where we think it is, so the folks that are actually going to find this using HiRISE from MRO will have a good idea. So right after landing, we get information from Curiosity, some touchdown information, and we take that information and we account for our known errors, such as navigation errors, and we come up with a best estimate. And that's the green diamond in the middle, in the blue ellipse there. So this was actually shown right after landing. This was our prediction, latest and greatest, that we had immediately after. So some of you may have already seen this. And this kind of sets up the next figure that I have, if you could go to the next graphic. So here we have the landing target, that same light blue ellipse. And like Gavin said, the landing target, we missed it by about 1.5 miles. That's actually off the graphic there to the left. And the green diamond is where we thought we landed right afterwards. And that's the estimate that we gave to the localization folks to try to find the rover. Now, we thought it would be within 1 kilometer of that. The red X is where we actually landed. So our estimation and where we actually landed was only 200 meters apart, well within that 1 kilometer green error circle. So we were very happy about that. Now to kind of shift gears, and if you look over to the right, you'll see the tungsten ballast masses, the entry balance masses, and our predictions. Now this is actually before landing, where we thought these 6 heavy balls of tungsten would land, are within that dark blue ellipse. And actually, if you look, where we expected those to land, there's blue circles, 6 blue circles. And they actually show the same trends that have been shown from the CTX DEM that was shown, I believe, a couple days ago with the actual landing location of those balance masses. And that's the overlay figure that you see. And so you can see that those locations are well within the error ellipse that's drawn around those balance masses. So those actually impacted where we expected. So that's kind of just to give you a flavor of what's to come. And this is based off, like Al and everyone has mentioned, off of minimal data that we have so far. So stay tuned. This is a huge effort, and it's going to be exciting when we get the rest of the data back to really be able to tell the story of what happened during EDL. So with that, I pass it off to Ben.
Thank you, Jody. All right, so as Jody just talked about, all the hardware that we jettisoned as we went through the EDL maneuver and we successfully landed on Mars last Sunday, I'm going to talk about what we're going to do next on the surface, which is to jettison the EDL software and to now move on to our surface version of software. So if you can pull up the first chart. So the flight software is the software that runs on board Curiosity, and the software controls all the onboard functions of the rover. The software is responsible for everything, all the autonomous functions that happen during cruise, and the software ran this EDL sequence that this wonderful team designed last Sunday. And the software is also what we've been using to do the characterization phase up until now, up until software on the surface of Mars. If you think about it, what's hard about this, if you think about my phone has a processor that is 10 times as fast as the processor that's on Curiosity, and it has 16 times as much storage as Curiosity has. And my phone doesn't have to land anything on Mars. All my phone has to do is follow Bobik's Twitter feed. So the challenging part about this is that my phone wouldn't survive the journey to Mars. So we have to build computers that are robust enough to survive the harsh interstellar space, the harsh interplanetary space. And when we do that, there are certain limitations that we have, and so some of those limitations include the size of the flight software image that we have, and that forces us every now and then to update the flight software to add new capabilities. So if you go to the next chart. When we launched back in November, we included 4 major applications in the software. Those really were, we had the launch cruise application, which controlled the function of the rover during cruise. We had our EDL application, our first version of our EDL application, a first version of sort of the core surface flight software. And we also had a 4th application, which was designed in from the start, which was the capability for us to update the software while we were en route to Mars. So unlike the hardware, which once we launch it, it's gone. It's on its way to Mars, and there's nothing we can do to get it back. The software, we can radiate those bits to Mars and have them catch up with the rover on its way there and actually update the software in cruise. So if you go to the next slide. This software update capability, we've now exercised it already once in cruise. We used it back at the first week of June to update the EDL software. So to go from those 4 applications we had in the launch cruise software and to actually update to what was our final version of the EDL software. So if you skip to the next chart. And this really was EDL v2.0 is what I call it, 2.0 of the EDL software. And we added a number of robustness improvements in the EDL software, and we really exercised this software update capability. Now, we also revved the Surface software somewhat. We added v1.1 of the Surface software, but what we couldn't do is we couldn't put all of the Surface software in to the flight software image that we uploaded in Cruise back on the first week of June because there just wasn't enough space for it. There just wasn't enough. We have a limitation on the size of that flight software image, and, well, the Surface mission is pretty complicated and requires a lot of smarts, and those smarts exceeded the size of the image that we could have. So what we did was that, if you go to the next chart, we uploaded in Cruise the R10 version of flight software, but we just left it on the rover and we didn't actually install it. And what the R10 version of the flight software gives us is it gives us this, not just the basic Surface capabilities, but also adds in the ability for us to use the sampling system on the rover and for us to drive with the rover. And so those are our real 2 new apps that are coming in R10 and the cool features that we have in the R10 flight software and why we want to spend these next few sols on Mars updating to the R10 flight software. So if you go to the next chart. So first one, the sampling system. Right now we have the capability in just our basic Surface software to check out all the health of the instruments, but we don't really have the capability to go and make the full use of all this great hardware that we shipped with us to Mars. And so R10 software gives us the capability to use the robotic arm fully, to use the drill, to use the dust removal tool, to use the whole sampling chain, and to ingest those samples into SAM and analyze them with Chemin. And so all this exciting stuff that you're going to see this mission do over the next few months and years on Mars, you're going to see that that comes from the capabilities that are in this R10 software. And so there's one other application. Go to the next chart. Well, Curiosity is a Martian mega rover. Curiosity was born to drive. And so the R10 software includes the capability for Curiosity to really get out and stretch her wheels on the surface of Mars. So this is the R10 software gives us the autonomous driving capabilities, the ability for the rover to drive both in using onboard images to detect hazards that are around the rover and to drive safely across the surface of Mars. And this is really what we'll use when we set out on our first drive here on Mars. And so if you go to the next slide. So we really say R10, unlike R9. R9 was the version of software that was optimized for EDL and allowed our EDL friends to get us down safely to the surface of Mars. But R10 is optimized for Surface. And so it has a lot of great stuff that the science team wants, that the Surface team wants in order to enable this fantastic mission. And so that's why we're willing to spend some time here doing the install. And if you go to the next chart. So where we are right now is that we just completed our Sol 4 activities, and our Sol 4 activities were to prepare for the installation of the flight software. And so everything is good. We've gotten a go from mission management to proceed forward with this 4-day installation process of installing the flight software on board the rover. Now we have 2 computers, so it takes a little bit longer for us to do the full install because we want to do it very safely, do it step by step, and take our time doing the software updates. So what you see is that on Sol 5, what we'll do is we'll do a toe dip into the R10 flight software. So just on our prime computer, we'll do a boot into the R10 flight software, but don't install it fully, just to check it out. And we'll come back out, we'll look at all the data that we got down from the rover to make sure that the R10 software is functioning nominally. And then if everything looks good, on Sol 6, we'll commit to R10. And so we'll actually do the full install on the prime computer of the R10 flight software. And once we have that and everything's working well on the prime computer with the R10 flight software, we'll move on to doing the same thing, except now on our backup computer, where on Sol 7, we'll do another toe dip into the R10 flight software on the backup computer. And on Sol 8, we'll do a full commit of R10 onto the backup computer, at which point we will have all the R10 flight software installed and ready to go with R10. So that's all I have.
Thank you. We're going to begin with questions here in the auditorium, and then we will go to the phone lines. And so let me get a microphone to you. We'll start here in the very front and give us your name and affiliation. Thanks.
Hi, Joe Palka from NPR. Two questions. One is, when you talked about capturing the ground with the radar, were you capturing a wide swath of Mars, or was the radar able to differentiate between a bumpy place and a smooth place or something like that? And the second question is, if you were going to run this mission again today, or let's say 3 months from now when you've got all the data down, would you make that ellipse smaller, or are you at the limits of what this system can actually do?
I think I can take the first part, and maybe Gavin can take the second part. So the radar is fixed to the descent stage. It's at the mercy of where the wrist mode chooses to point it in terms of what ground it's going to be measuring. And it doesn't do any discrimination. If we have a very wild wrist mode and the radar ends up looking at Mount Sharp and measuring the top of Mount Sharp, which it couldn't actually do, but hypothetically, it would be measuring the vehicle's altitude relative to that point. And so one of the reasons we picked the landing ellipse we did was that we knew the altitude across the entire landing ellipse didn't vary that much. And no matter what terrain feature the radar was pointed at, the altitude measured relative to that terrain feature would be close enough that we would still separate from the back shell at the right point. Around the moment of back shell separation, the radar's certainly looking within about 1 kilometer of the ultimate landing site. And so our criteria is we want the altitude of the ground to vary no more than about 100 meters within 1 kilometer range of the touchdown location.
And then for the second question, can we get the ellipse size smaller next time? There were some ideas that we came up with over the design of this vehicle. Part of it depends on where you're landing. If it's a higher elevation site, then we may need a little bit more lift to make sure we can land our heavy rover a little bit higher, and that folds in the ellipse size a little bit. But we do have a few ideas that can probably shave a couple miles off of it. We did really well this time. We have to look at the data and see, the way we imagine it work, are we correct? But I'm confident we can continue to do at least as good as Curiosity and better in the future.
The big winners for ellipse size error tend to be atmosphere, so
Yeah.
I have a hand in that, and the aerodynamics. So what we learn from the reconstruction that we do over the next few months should help us take a look at that and see if we can chop back at that a little bit.
Okay, we're going to take one more question here in the room, and then we'll go to the phone line. Right over on this side. Craig?
Thank you. It's Craig Cavalt with Aerospace America. I guess maybe for Steve or Devin, was the altitude accordion capability, did it play a role here, or was everything so tight that it just didn't matter?
So the altitude accordion, or the accordion that we had allocated was 100 meters. So we allowed for our estimate of where the ground was to be wrong by up to 100 meters. From the data we've gotten so far, it was wrong by 3 meters. So we overachieved in that area as well. So everything, again, it was right down the middle.
Okay, and a second question, since EDL has been achieved, I guess, to the whole EDL team, a show of hands maybe on how many people are going to be looking for another job? Serious question. Really?
Sure. Right.
I don't think we've started to think about that yet.
Yeah.
We're still relishing
Yeah, exactly.
the success.
And actually, a lot of us are going to be involved in the reconstruction as well. But I think, we're thinking about future projects and what we're going to be working on, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to go to the phone line next. Julia Sisler with Canadian Broadcasting. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Julia Sisler with CBC in Yellowknife. And I just have a couple of questions about the naming process. So how did you decide to call the Curiosity landing site Yellowknife?
Yeah.
I think that's a team you'll have to ask the question you'll have to ask the surface team. I think John Grotzinger is certainly willing to talk about that at length.
Okay, the basic idea was that there are old rocks on Mars and there are some of the oldest rocks in the world by Yellowknife. Was there more to it than that?
I would like to know too.
Unfortunately, you're just talking to the delivery guys here.
Yeah,
so.
we're just movers.
Maybe you can tell me just if it's normal practice to name landing sites after cities in the world.
Yeah, I think the naming convention was done by the science team, and I'm looking around here in the room to see if we have a science team member, and I don't see one, but maybe oh wait, I do see one.
That's Joy.
But let me see if she's prepared to answer the question.
Okay, thanks.
And Joy Crisp, the deputy project scientist, is here in the room, and let us get her a microphone.
Perfect, thank you.
Great, here we go.
I don't fully know what's behind the name, but I can make one correction, which is it's a quadrangle name. So I think you heard in previous press conferences that the whole ellipse was divided up into these quadrangles that are about a mile by a mile in size, and then each one of those was mapped by a team member. And we got ready right before landing with geologically significant names that related to things like ancient geology terrains on the Earth that tie into our theme of science. So Yellowknife is this one, but I can't answer all the questions that you've asked, but I did want to set that straight. It's the name of the quadrangle that we landed in.
Okay, are all the other quadrangles named also?
They will be. We're getting those lined up.
Okay, but it is the quadrangle that the Curiosity landed in?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if it's normal practice to name these things, I guess, or is this unique to this project?
Well, what is unique to this project was the dividing up of the ellipse into quadrangles and mapping ahead of time. And that was really driven by the wonderful orbital data sets that we had. We wanted to get ready by doing this mapping so that we could more quickly do strategic planning of where to send the rover and understand where we landed.
Could you just speak about the sort of similarity between the rock and surface on Mars compared to what's here near Yellowknife?
Not yet.
Okay. But am I correct to say that the basis between picking the name Yellowknife was the age of the rock?
Right. They're on the order of 2.7 billion years old. So we went to Mars to really get at the ancient geology because that's where we think there might be evidence for past environments similar to on Earth. So it's connected in that way, simply ancient rocks that might preserve evidence of past environments favorable for life.
And one more question. Would anyone in Yellowknife have been consulted before this, or is this just purely based on geological similarities?
Not that I know of, but again, I wasn't totally plugged into the naming and how it was done.
Right, so we'll if you'd like to call our newsroom, we'll put you on the phone with the person who came up with the name, and we can probably answer a lot more of your questions that way. And we're going to take a couple more questions here in the room, and then we'll go back to the phone lines. I know you were next, and we'll get the microphone up here to the front of the room, and then we'll go to the back. Thank you.
Hi there, Jonathan Amos, BBC News. A couple of quick ones. Did Mars Express see all the way down to the ground? I know the people in Europe were thinking they may miss the actual landing.
Yeah, to my knowledge, they did not get to the ground. This was per our predict. We expected them to lose coverage of us about a minute before landing, and that was about right.
Okay, and the second one, has anybody sort of studied the debris field from the descent stage impact to consider how it broke apart, what happened, what sort of impact it had?
We have another imaging opportunity coming up 6 days after landing, where we're going to take another high-rise image of the lander and also of the descent stage debris field. That will be a nadir image, so it will be better resolution, cleaner image, and we might be able to see more detail. There's not enough detail in the image we have currently because it was taken at such an oblique angle in order to see a lot of detail there. So we're really waiting for the better image.
Okay, we'll go next here in the room.
Yeah, hi, this is for Ben. And as someone who is perhaps not as cell phone and technologically attuned as others. I was hoping you could, one, go over again what the capabilities were relative to a cell phone, and two, if you could just maybe walk us through a little bit as to how you could do that. I mean, how you can have so much capability on Mars based on software that is less than what you're going to have in a cell phone.
Yeah, so the rover has a radiation-hardened processor in it. It actually has two of them in its two redundant compute elements. The processor runs at 133 megahertz. So if you think about your phone having a 1 gigahertz processor in it and your desktop now having a 2 gigahertz or 2.5 gigahertz processor in it, the processing power in our rover is much less. But we do have two full computers in the rover, so we have both a prime and a redundant backup that's there. And they have onboard flash storage in them. So when I talked about the storage of my phone has 64 gigabytes of storage. The rover has 4 gigabytes of storage in it. But what we're able to do is that since we're designing this custom software for it, we're able to optimize that software for the particular application that we want to do. And so when we were writing the EDL software, we knew of the limitations of our processor, and we were able to focus it just for what we need to do to get done with the EDL, to make EDL successful. And when you have a team that's really a world-class, talented software team, and you give them a challenge like make EDL work on this processor, they're going to find a way to do it. And so it's really the ultimate reason about how we're able to do it is that we have a lot of very, very talented software engineers, a really talented software engineering team that when they're given a challenge, they solved it. And they were able to get it to work on a slower processor. And then so one of the reasons why we wait for the R10 flight software is that now we can have a version of software that is optimized for the surface. And so we can write that custom software that now can just focus on the surface part of the mission and doesn't need to worry about some of the control loops and some of the additional processing overhead that loads down the system when you're running EDL. And so by going to R10, we're actually freeing up some of our processor utilization. So we actually get a lower utilization. It's like closing a few applications on your computer and wow, the whole thing runs faster and now I can drive. So that's what we want to do.
And processing doesn't change at all, even though you're going to need more, it's going to be doing a lot more things now on the surface.
Right, well the core processor speed doesn't change, right. But we are running a lot less stuff. And that's how we gain back some of that margin to be able to run the great surface science applications that are going to enable this mission. Yes, and shout out from the front row. Yes, the processor is much faster than the MER processor that we have.
All right, next I'm going to go to the phone line. We have Irene Klotz from Reuters. Go ahead.
Thanks very much. I have two questions. The first is following up, I think it was the first question about the homing in this landing target even more, because this sky crane system is kind of being touted as I think the phrase was a workhorse for the future. I was just wondering if the precision that you were able to get with Curiosity is indeed going to make the cut for, future missions, including like supplies or some of these other kind of farther off things that have been talked about. And if you could maybe just flesh out a little bit more by what you said about being able to tweak that by a few miles, what exactly would that entail?
Sure. So, one of the important things that Curiosity's done is demonstrate that guided entry, as we've seen here on Earth, works on Mars. And that's an incredible tool for the future missions to take advantage of. It really, I think, depends on the mission that we look at using in the future. Are we looking to land at a particular target to land near a base or a sample that we want to bring back? It really depends on the mission, but I think there are a few things that we've already imagined, and I think we'll come up with some other ideas after we look at the data to figure out how much more we can finesse that ellipse and make it better.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that we're already looking at it.
Yeah.
Thanks. And then my other question, I think I saw a JPL blog post that Rob Manning won the bingo game of where it was going to land, and just was curious if there was anything more than accolades with that guess.
We had multiple bingo games among different groups of people. The biggest one was a giant poster about 10 feet long that was printed out, and Rob Manning indeed was the closest. Rob Manning was also one of what we call our gremlins who operated some of the readiness testing, so we believe he may have rigged the system somehow.
Okay, we're coming back in the room in John Johnson. Go ahead.
I just wanted a little more information, if any of you have it, about that already iconic photograph of the parachute descending with the rover below it. This picture had to be programmed far in advance, is that right, to be taken?
Yeah, that's right. We had to give in fact, we provided the first timing that we wanted this parachute picture to be taken way back in April. It's targeted for about 6 minutes after entry. The goal was to make sure that, remember, things are focused on in case things don't go well, not if things do go well. But the idea was to get a picture to make sure that we saw an inflated parachute or not an inflated parachute to see if there was any damage or not. So the goal was to take it long enough into entry to make sure the parachute was inflated, but not so late that it had already hit the ground.
How difficult was it to know that it would be right there?
It's certainly very difficult. It was certainly a little bit more uncertain this time than it was for Phoenix per se, because MRO is coming, which took the picture. The high-rise camera is on MRO. That's right, and it's coming overhead, almost directly overhead. So we had to be in the middle, roughly 5.5, 6 kilometers of the landing target to make sure we were in the picture. Guided entry helped with that a lot. Obviously, we wouldn't be there without guided entry. So this picture is also a confirmation of the precision with which we landed.
And just some stats on that photograph. It's about 1 second or so before MLE priming. So we're at an altitude here of about 3,000 meters, just a little bit, right around 3,000 meters, and descending probably about 80 meters per second at this point.
And I'll add one more thing. Clearly, we all love this picture, so let's talk about it. Pre-landing day, we guessed we had about a 50-50 chance of actually getting this picture, just based on the fact that the field of view of the high-rise camera doesn't cover the entire landing ellipse. So it was about 50-50.
Okay, we're going to take one more here in the room, and then we'll go to the phone lines. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to double check. When does the installation of the software upgrade begin on Earth time? Would that be like tomorrow, or and like how long? And it's supposed to go for 4 days. You know when it's supposed to end Earth time approximately?
Right. So it goes through Sol 8. So it starts on Sol 5. So it starts today. It starts later today, Earth time, right? And it goes through Sol 8. So 4 days from today.
Okay. And then the other thing is that can you guys just quickly, kind of more succinct, more consumer-friendly way, explain like what you think were the factors in there being a 1.5 mile deviation from your ideal landing spot?
Well, I mean, it was all ideal, right? It was inside inside the ellipse.
Yeah.
But so we're still looking at the data. But as I tried to explain before, we had a bank reversal pretty late. And that basically lofts us a little bit, basically stretches us a little bit out, and we didn't have time to correct for that before we started allowing it to fly right towards the center along the center line of the ellipse. So we think that's part of it. As Al's mentioned before, we're also sensitive in terms of where we land the ellipse due to headwind or tailwind compared to what we were expecting. And so that's going to be one of the things we try to reconstruct is what were the winds doing the day we landed, and how did that shift where we landed.
You thought it might have been a tailwind in this case. You're not sure.
It would suggest that, but we'll have to look at it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to the phone line. Leonard David with Aerospace America. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Leonard David here. You've kind of already touched on some of this, but I hate to drag you back there. But if you were an astrobiologist on this mission, you'd probably be a little concerned about the kick-up of material off Mars and scattering it on top of the rover. Is there anything that could be done with longer tethers or less powerful engines or anything like that would fit into a new design of a sky crane, particularly if we're really going to be using that particular device in the future?
Sure. Certainly, one way that you could help mitigate doing this is actually using a longer tether, but we analyzed this very heavily during development of Curiosity, and we tried to strike the balance between keeping the bridles short enough to be manageable, and reducing the amount of debris that we would kick up. And all along, we consulted with the instruments and the people who were the cognizant engineers on the rover top deck to make sure that they were in the loop about knowing that debris could be up there and to what extent it could be there. And so everything that we've seen in the pictures and the data that we've got during landing, it's all as expected.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, we've got another call on the phone line. It's Mike Wall from space.com. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, hi. Yeah, I've got two questions for Ben. First of all, could you just actually confirm that the actual surface software that you're going to switch over to, that was beamed to the rover during cruise, right? I just wanted to make sure that I understand that correctly, and it wasn't sent from Earth in the last few days.
That's
and
right.
also, I mean, is there any science that the rover can be doing during the installation, or is it going to be pretty quiet on the science front for the next few days?
So on the first question, yeah, we uploaded this software during cruise and had it stored on the file system ready to be installed once we got down to the surface of Mars. We do have, just for background, we do have the capability to upload software while we're on the surface, and we do actually plan to continue to update the software as we go through the mission. So this it didn't necessarily need to be uploaded in cruise, but we had an opportunity to do that, and the software is ready to go, so we chose that as the opportunity to upload the software. As far as science goes over the next few sols, this is primarily an engineering activity. So we are mostly focusing on just getting done the engineering of doing the installation and standing down on science for the next 4 sols.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going now here in the front. Go ahead.
Hi there, Sally Rail with the Planetary Society. Were there any surprises in EDL at all, or would it be safe to say that the biggest surprise was that it went actually better than all the sims?
There were a couple surprises, I think, that we're going to look into. We landed with more fuel than I think we expected, a little bit more fuel than we think we expected. Not a bad situation to be in necessarily, but it's something we definitely want to take a look at. There were also a couple of tone indications sent direct to Earth that also, seem unlikely. So we want to take a look at that as well to see if anything is real there too. Again, we're working with 1 megabyte of the 60 megabytes or 100 megabytes, excuse me, that we eventually hope to get. So I think the best thing for us to do now is kind of wait and see, get that full data set and go through that in detail. That'll answer all our questions.
Okay, and a personal question for you, Alan. You have been through landing before with MER. You announced the Curiosity landing, and I'm just wondering, how does that fit in your repertoire of life moments?
Certainly way up there. This has been an amazing week.
Thank you.
All right.
Leo Enright with Irish Television. I just wanted to follow up on Leonard David's question about the descent stage. Looking to the future, since this seems to be a game changer potentially, are there obvious ways that you would do it differently now? For instance, it would seem that it was, dare I say, over-engineered for safety reasons. You used Viking legacy jets and so on. Are there obvious things that you would do differently straight away? And do you envisage that this would be a much lighter and meaner vehicle next time round?
Well, there are minor things that we would probably change if we had to do it again, but one of the best ways to do lower cost, more reliable missions is to stick with what works. And I wouldn't say that the system was over designed at all. I mean, it was designed to allow the scientists to choose where they wanted to explore on Mars. They happened to pick a place that had a nice flat landing pad right next to it. And so as an EDL team, we kind of got lucky because the science store they wanted to go to had a parking lot. And so we were, we were able to take advantage of that. And had we landed on, had we used the sky crane to its full extent, we would have been able to handle much more rugged terrain, much larger rocks, things like that. So I wouldn't say it's over-designed, and things that we would change in the future, just very minor things.
Okay, we have a call on the line. Ken Kramer with Spaceflight Magazine. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Well, congratulations first on a great success. My question is, would you be able to apply any of these guided entry techniques to the airbag system if you had to go back to that to make that a little bit, far more precise, actually? Thank you.
I believe we could, but it would require using RCS jets just like Curiosity did to basically control the orientation during the hypersonic flight. I don't think the MER rovers had that capability, so it would be a design change.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any more questions here in the room? Yes, let's go ahead.
Jonathan Amos, BBC again. Is there any heat shield data?
There is Medley data, which is the Mars EDL instrumentation data that instrumented the heat shield to tell us about what was going on. We are just getting that data back now. Some of that was sent in real time, but the recorded data, parts of that now have gotten down, and we're beginning to look at that. I think it's safe to say we have the data. I think it's also safe to say that we haven't looked through it in detail yet. We do know that we triggered several tones during EDL that told us that things were going pretty much as expected, that we did see heating on the spacecraft, but we don't have enough yet to go through in detail about how well the heat shield performed.
Do you have a peak temperature?
We don't right now. I think we need to look at exactly how deep, which thermocouples we got measurements from, and what those measurements were. The Medley team is, I'm sure, already beginning to look at that information, but we need to correlate that as well against the spacecraft trajectory data, which we're also waiting to get back down.
Okay, we're taking a question here.
Mark Kaufman again with the Washington Post and National Geographic. Steve, you had said that reusing technology is the best way to cut cost. Just in terms of a ballpark figure, if you were to do something like this again, I mean, are we talking about half price, third?
I'm not falling into that trap, but we'd have to look at the numbers to see exactly what a rebuild of a Sky Crane system would look like.
Okay, we have project scientist John Grotzinger in the room, and he wants to talk a little bit more about the naming of that quadrangle. So, John, go ahead.
I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, not to detract from the great work these guys have done. Point number one is, this is not the name of the landing site. Yellowknife is the name of the quadrangle. And the reason that the science team came up with that as an option is because in North America, if you ask what is the port of call that you leave from to go on the great missions of geological mapping to the oldest rocks in North America, it's Yellowknife. You can drive there, you can fly there, you can't take a train there, and from there you have to get in a bush plane, store some gear, and go off for several months at a time, and usually get picked up later on having mapped some old rocks. So we thought it would be kind of neat, because our sort of mapping procedure will involve moving between these different quadrangles, and it's sort of a great tradition that was started here on Earth, and we're trying to do it on Mars.
Great, thank you. Okay, we have a question at the very back. We'll get you a microphone, Sandon.
Sandon Totten with KPCC. I was wondering this landing happened in the middle of the Olympics, and I think we all expected it to be a big deal, but it has really caught on. I can't seem to turn on Facebook or Twitter without someone still talking about it, or new memes popping up, animations, cats all over the rover now. I want to know a little bit if the sort of total love and embrace that the public seems to be giving it surprises you a bit, because you were just focused on the science, and kind of what are some of the more interesting things you've seen in the public sphere about this landing and about Curiosity? Have you gotten any cool fan mail or any cool reactions from people? Have you seen something that just totally tickled you?
Well, I can say a few words about that, and I'll let everybody else on the team chime in too. But I've actually been overwhelmed by the amount of just the social media interaction. I get questions on Twitter and email and Facebook, and it's great to be able to be completely in touch with the public on this. I feel like it gives them an opportunity to feel like they're connected to this mission, and after all, they paid for it, so they should be. And it was kind of hard to follow all of this outside activities that were going on when you're in the control room and focused on making sure we land safely. But I've still, it's going to take me weeks to get through all of the Facebook posts and the Twitter comments and all the other articles that have been online. It's just been amazing for me.
I think it's great. I think it actually shows that America, the world, is interested in math and science, really, when you break it down to that. So I think it's great. I hope the communication and the social media, it keeps rolling along, especially now that we're in surface operations. Things are also just as exciting as EDL.
Did you ever expect when you started this mission, though, that you guys would end up being such rock stars?
I got recognized in the pizza parlor on my day. That was a little weird for me. Sometimes you worry that that as a people we're not that interested in doing this anymore. But it's great to see that we are. That's still what we're about.
For me, the media attention, the social media has been overwhelming. But the biggest surprise to me, having gone through this now, is the enormous feeling of accomplishment associated with a successful landing, and how much that's amplified by having such an awesome group of coworkers. There's thousands of people that have put this together, and everybody's worked tirelessly with tremendous dedication. Everybody here is fantastic to work with, and it just makes it all the sweeter to share the triumph with such a fantastic group of people.
All right, do we have any more questions here in the room? We've got one up here in the front, and okay.
Thanks, Craig Cavalt with Aerospace America again. How important was the 2-year delay to the ultimate success of the mission so far?
I think it was critical. We weren't ready in 2009. I think as a mission, we were not ready. As a project, we were not ready. It's easy to point fingers, but I mean, we're all in this together. And having that extra time certainly gave us the opportunity to make sure that everything was going to work right. And the proof's in the pudding.
Okay, I believe that is it. No more questions for today, but I do want to tell everyone that this is our final news conference for this week. But be sure to follow us online. We'll have updates posted for our next news telecons and, of course, all of our new images and videos. All of that information can be found at www.nasa.gov/MSL or at the JPL homepage at jpl.nasa.gov. And we will have more news on the mission next week, so be sure to check there and follow the mission. We have a long way to go. Thank you so much for joining us.